Welcome to TITUBANTI TESTI 9, Binomio di lettura. And it is a great pleasure to welcome the two speakers of today, Nina van der Sype from Ghent University. Sorry, I was starting speaking Dutch for some weird reason. And my old friend and colleague, Francesco Borghesi. It is a true pleasure, especially not only because of the excellent quality of the two speakers, and we are very eager to listen to their presentation, but also because this is one of the rare cases in which we are going to discuss to consider a non-classical text. I mean, the majority, it happened once that we had another early modern text, and this is the second time, so we are very thrilled about this particular discussion, the senectute by Erasmus of Rotterdam. As you know, the rules are very simple. I'm now going to introduce the speakers, and the one who accepted to discuss the text proposed by Nina is Francesco. So in this case, Francesco is going to be the first. And Francesco, if you want, you can also show a PowerPoint or a handout if necessary. I mean, you are being able to do so.
I have neither, so you'll have to trust my ekphrastic virtues, whether they are existent or not. Firstly, I would like to thank Marco for the invite and Nina for suggesting the text. I should perhaps preface what I will be saying with the fact that I'm particularly thankful because I did not know that Erasmus had written a poem on the old age, so it was an opportunity for me to read it for the first time and try to understand a little bit more the context. I'm also not a specialist of Erasmus, but that's a different matter. Anyway, I mean, I'm really grateful for this opportunity, and to get into medias res. 1506 is the year that we want to keep into consideration here. It's if we go by the general accepted birth date of Erasmus, 1466. This is 1506 is his 40th year, and yes, as you probably know, in 1499 he had moved to England, which was a very important experience for him, and that is also where he became sort of universally, or rather Europe-wide famous. As many of the humanists that he had met in England, he wanted to visit Italy, and the opportunity comes when the doctor of Henry VII asks him to accompany his sons. Rather, the name of the doctor was Giovanni Battista Boerio from Genoa. An Italian asks him to accompany his two sons, Giovanni and Bernardo, to go to Italy to visit some universities. So they start traveling in the early part of the summer in 1506. They are in Paris, where Erasmus is celebrated from a group of friends, and also uses the opportunity to be in Paris to print his translations of Euripides and Lucian, along with a selection from his epigrams and one of the many editions of the Adagia for Josse Bard. In August, the group start traveling again, and according to Johann Huizinga, when they were sort of traveling across the Alps, Erasmus composes his Carmen de Senectute, which is also why is sometimes remembered as Carmen Alpestre. So according to the story that Huizinga retells, at that point, Erasmus had been sort of taken a break, so to say, from the rest of the group. They were fighting or something similar, and he needed some solitude. So he left the group to distract himself, and he did so by composing the Carmen Alpestre, which, according to him, was dedicated to the old age, and also dedicated to a sort of renowned German doctor, Wilhelm Kopp, who in many occasions before had saved, or rather had cured, Erasmus' health, who was rather inclined to being sick. So in a sense, the only spectators of these compositions were the Alps between France and Italy, and apparently the Carmen was also known or remembered as the Carmen de Fuga Vitae Umane, which perhaps puts another layer to the understanding of the beginning of this poem. So the scholars who have dealt with this poem usually link the composition of this poem to sort of an existential crisis. We could call it perhaps a midlife crisis. And Huizinga is one of them. Jean-Claude Margolin, who wrote a long line-by-line commentary of this poem, says that the poem contains a sort of continuous reassessment by Erasmus on himself, which is part of Erasmus' reflexive character. So that's the start. So the idea is that Erasmus writes this poem to reflect not only on old age in general, but also on his own recollection of his youth. A little bit earlier, on the 1st of April, 1506, he wrote a letter to Servatius Rotger, who had been when they were younger, sort of his companion in the monastery of Stein, of which an Augustinian monastery where Erasmus started studying and his career. And Rotger at that point had become the prior of the monastery, and Erasmus writes a letter to him that I think is quite interesting, and I'll quote it. And he's writing, I can't stop meditating how I can consecrate the rest of my life to piety only, to Christ only. I consider the life of a man, even if long, as something sorry, I can't write because I'm translating the writing, as something that goes away very quickly, fugace ed effimera. I also know that my health is weak and that my strength have been weakened by the study and my own disgrace or my own lack of luck. I see that there is an end to culture, and it's like beginning every day once again. For this reason, I need to be happy in my mediocrity, especially now because I reached a good level of understanding of Greek, and I decided to dedicate myself on the meditation on death and the building of my spirit. In truth, that's Erasmus continuing, I should have done this before, and I should have used my earlier years better, because those were the most precious richness, the most precious wealth I've ever had, when they were in their splendor. However, if it's too late now to do this towards the end of one's life, one should spare more so the remaining years of one's life when one is weak and life is of lower quality. So, in a sense, the Carmen Alpestre echoes these topics that Erasmus had written to Servatius in a letter, and also recall his most important interest for the study of the classics. Going back to the story that I was telling before, after the composition of the Carmen, the group continues traveling towards Italy, and towards the end of the summer, they reach Turin, where Erasmus obtains a doctorate in theology. This is important to recall, because Erasmus attaches a particular importance to the doctorate, because allowed him to speak with more authority of theological matters. After Turin, he is in Bologna, where he continues studying the classics, Latin and Greek, and also completes the largest version of his adagia, adding the Greek ones. So this is, in a sense, the space, the context in which the Carmen Alpestre is composed. I would just like to recall briefly the structure of this poem. So it's made of 309 verses, and it starts with the first 11 verses as the exordium, which are dedicated with the dedication to the doctor, to Wilhelm Kopp, of whom Erasmus exalts, the medical capabilities, who were able to cure all diseases except the old age. What follows in the next 120 lines is a section that is dedicated to, we could say, dissuasion. So there is no remedy that can be taken against old age, because old age destroys the benefits of youth and brings to decline. Um, I mean, I'm not going to get into details about this part. And then there is another section, the third section, which is an exhortation, which is about 20 lines long, um, which is particularly important because it's actually an exhortation to himself to wake up. He says, "Wake up, Erasmus, even if you're old, there is still time. We are in a critical age, is a transitional moment, but it's not over yet." Um, the last part, the last few lines, in which the epilogue is placed, the end of the poem, there is it sounds almost, reads almost like a prayer. So Erasmus is asking Christ, the Creator and the Redemptor, to give him and all the humankind that their desires can become true. So this poem is, in a sense, I mean, I think that the poem center is in reflecting on a possible resolution of the alleged crisis by Erasmus. What Erasmus does is not just describing his own sorrows or his own incipient old age. Let's remember that he was 40 at this stage, so not technically old, even in a medieval or Renaissance perspective, but is also recalling memories from his early years, his youth, with, in a sense, with lyricity that reminds a little bit of the Romantic period. The reason why I'm recalling this is that in my opinion, one of the authors who dedicates a big part of this work to this topic before him, and in a way that echoes at times Erasmus, is Francesco Petrarca. So before concluding, because I know that I probably have just a few minutes, I will recall that Petrarca deals with the topic of old age in various parts of his work. In the Rerum Vulgarium Fragmenta, the old fragment, so to say, the last poem is dedicated to that and reconnects to the beginning, and obviously it also becomes an even more central issue in the letters of old age, in the Seniles and in the Remedis Utriusque Fortuna. So Petrarch tends to represent himself as sort of as an exception of someone who had meditated on his age, using the classics as an aid, and therefore being able to write about, or rather to impart a teaching regarding the brevity of life, the escaping of time, and the fact that man tends not to realize how fast this time goes. Petrarch writes about the inextimabili fuga temporis. In the Rerum Vulgarium Fragmenta, in the Canzoniere, the topic of the old age appears at the very end, but it reconnects to the very beginning. So in a sense, some critics have noted that it sort of frames the Canzoniere itself, because the old age is perceived by Petrarch as an end goal, something that is not seen in a negative way, but something that it's an ideal ending of life. So in the sense, the previous years are a preparation for this. So from this point of view, the old age appears as a tribute that the body, the human body, pays to time. So it's a time that the mind, the human mind, tends to consider as suspended, as not really being present, but that can be postponed indefinitely. But obviously, then it dawns on men how fast it comes. So in Petrarch, there is this play between the memoria and cogitatio, which I think becomes a topic also in Erasmus. And there is a switch from remembering youth and in a nostalgic way, and the actual reflection on what it means to be old, not just in a consolatory way. So it's just not, is not literature of the consolatio, but is actually something more. So the reflection on the old age becomes sort of a constitutive element of Petrarch's work when he treats when he treats this topic, and I think the same can be said for the poem by Erasmus. We have examples of this line, and I'll try to conclude very soon, in other authors that have this, let's say, positive line, that is a line that is not critical or derogatory of the old age, but is rather positive and sees at the bright side of coming to an old age. We have the cases of Marbodius or Marbodus of Rennes talking about the old age bringing a lot of problems, physical problems and other problems, but uh, on the other hand, one acquires prudentia and peace of mind. Obviously, there is the model of Cicero from the Senectute, which is also a positive one. There is the model presented by Seneca in especially in in the letter 12 of the first book of Ad Lucilium, which present the same model. And in a sense, the point here becomes in Petrarch, but I would suggest is also in Erasmus, the reflection is not to think about the old age in a philosophical perspective, not vaguely, but the problem becomes to be old and how to think the old age. In conclusion, and going back to Erasmus and his Carmen Alpestre, one could say, and I'm quoting a specific part, which is towards the middle. Satis actenus miselle cessatum satis et dormitum, pellere somnos nunc tempus est Erasme, nunc expergisce tota recipiscere mente. So stop there, or you now stop, you slept enough. Kick away or send away your dreams, Erasmus, because it's time. You have to wake up again and take possessions of your thought. So I think is not impossible to think that on this specific line of thinking, Petrarch becomes, if not a source, an inspiration for Erasmus on the topic of old age. So I thank you for your patience, and sorry if I was very concise, but the time is what it is.
Yeah, thank you so much, Francesco. That was very good also to have all this background information. Of course, it is interesting to know about Petrarca. So you were discussing another author that I know he's very interesting also for Nina's project. Now we are eager to listen to Nina. And may I ask you, those who have the micro on, that they close it, because every now and then I hear voices coming from other places. Okay, Nina, go ahead. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I will try to share my PowerPoint. If this works.
Yeah.
So I hope this is sharing.
Yeah.
Okay,
Perfect.
great. So yes, of course, I would like to start with thanking Francesco for his engagement with the text and for indeed his very interesting presentation on the background and also the interaction with Petrarch, which is indeed very intriguing. And of course, also Marco for giving me the opportunity to propose this text as part of this seminar. It's indeed a lesser known text, but a very interesting one that I'm very eager to discuss with you all present here. So the choice for this poem by Erasmus is inspired by the topic of my current PhD research, which is the literary and poetic representation of older age in late antique Latin poetry. But my interest has also grown to sort of explore the reception of classic authors and poets' approaches to older age in later times, including the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So I sort of stumbled upon this poem quite by accident when I was reading an article, and I decided to take a closer look at it, and I was immediately interested by the whole poem. And I thought it was very interesting to explore further, because even though Erasmus remains best known for his Laus Tutitiae, it's actually quite surprising if you take a deep dive into his corpus. It's surprising the amount of epigrams and poems he has written on quite a wide variety of subjects, including this one on older age. Now, in my analysis tonight, or in my presentation, I would like to focus on the ways in which Erasmus has been inspired and influenced by the late Latin poet Maximianus. So presumably around 550 AD, he composed a corpus of 6 elegies, which deal exclusively with the experience of older age as viewed from a first-person perspective. Now, Maximianus is the main author of my PhD, so I'm quite well known with his text, quite familiar with it. So when I read through Erasmus's Carmen, I immediately saw a few interesting parallels, which I would therefore like to explore further tonight. It's only going to be an introduction to what a dialogue between these two texts might bring about. Now, in my viewpoint, Maximianus could be a very good and reasonable comparandum for Erasmus, as his elegies became majorly popular in the Middle Ages. So he was read as a didactical author. The texts were spread throughout Europe in different manuscripts. So Erasmus, being a humanist and of course a man of knowledge, I think it's very probable that he had knowledge of this text, that he read it, and that it may also have inspired him for particular parts of his poem. So I will argue that Erasmus's Carmen can be read as sort of a mirror to that of Maximianus. Of course, this is not surprising. Maximianus, being a late antique author, he already borrowed quite heavily from Greek and Latin literary tradition. So in the Renaissance, this is sort of a strategy twice copied, so to speak. But on the other hand, I also want to explore the ways in which Erasmus offers a diverging solution to the vexing problem, quote unquote, of older age that is presented in the poem, by also engaging with a few specific elegiac elements as we find it in Maximianus' text. So I've named the first part of this presentation, Erasmus, the elegist question mark, because I do believe that there are some elegiac elements to be found and that are worth exploring for the complete comprehension of the text. Now, the defining feature of the first person perspective grants elegy the status of seemingly being a highly confessional genre of poetry, in which the reader is confronted with the author's innermost thoughts and feelings. However, scholarship has since long agreed upon the conscious construction of a persona within elegiac corpora. Think of the corpora of Tibullus, Ovid, Propertius of the 1st century BC. And scholarship has rejected a strictly autobiographical reading of these texts. Now, in the case of Erasmus, I think it's quite complicated. I would, on the one hand, argue the same, because as Francesco also mentioned, in 1506, when the Carmen was written, Erasmus was 40 years old, not exactly an old man. Langereis, in her 2021 biography of Erasmus, she mentions that it was actually the death of Erasmus's parents before the age of 40 that was the direct cause also for him to write this poem and to reflect on older age. Now, the complaint on older age and the relationship with death that is described definitely stems from a real pain and sorrow for losing his parents at such a young age. But on the other hand, it can also not be strictly based on autobiographical facts, as neither he nor his parents would have reached the age at which the symptoms, as they are described in the poem, would have manifested themselves. So even with an average life expectancy of, let's say, about 55 years old in the beginning of the 16th century, Erasmus is what we might label middle age at best. And Francesco also mentioned this, but I put a text here on the PowerPoint, is that he also acknowledges this fact that he is not himself an old man. So we have the line here in 196, consistimus senectae, so he's still resisting older age. He talks about the nova canicie, so his hairs have only recently turned white or gray. Also in 203, so he says sterilem procul adventare senectam, so barren old age is only approaching from afar, so as if he is looking at older age coming towards him, but it has not reached him yet. Now, I think this is important to acknowledge, because this means that we should look at the previous sections of the poem in a different light. So the first section, in which the ills of older age are described, then sort of become a projected future, sort of a fictional flash forward to what he might expect to happen when he truly reaches this old age, so to speak. And this is where my first parallel with Maximianus comes in, because when we look at his corpus, the reader is actually confronted not with a fictional flash forward, but with a fictional flashback. So it's the voice of an older narrator who looks back on episodes in his youth, and by looking back, he constructs his present state of older age, as comparing it to youth and describing everything he has lost. So I think in that light, the two texts sort of form an interesting diptych as they give different perspectives on the state of older age. As Francesco mentioned, like the Carmen of Erasmus is addressed to a specific someone, so not to a puella, as we might expect from classical elegy, but to this physician, Willem Kopp. And he is actually described as the dominus morborum, right? So the master of all diseases. I think the terminology here is quite interesting as well. The dominus definitely related to the domina, which is typical for this elegiac dynamic of the feminine dominating the masculine. So he's like the master of all diseases, right? And everything must yield to him. And the dedication, as has also been noted by Vredeveld, is actually sort of used by Erasmus to legitimatize all other parts that follow in the poem and that deal with sort of more medical details on older age. Now, what struck me in particular is the fact that this presence of Cop in Erasmus made me think of the presence of Boethius in Maximianus's third elegy. So Boethius, being a 6th century philosopher, he appears in this third poem. And to give you a brief narrative context here, so the younger persona of Maximianus has fallen in love with a girl, but he experiences this love as a true attack upon his body and mind, and he sees it as a disease that needs to be cured. And as his sole solution, he turns to Boethius, who's described as the magnarum scrutator maximirerum. So he's the scrutator being one who looks very closely at all the big things in life. This is probably a reference to philosophy itself, which was seen as a higher form of intellectual pursuit than, for example, playful and very light love elegy. So it's this real life external authority in the form of Boethius that then cures the younger persona of Maximianus from the disease of love. And as we start to read the Carmen in the first few lines, it seems as if Erasmus, in a similar manner, will appeal to the medical knowledge of Cop to help him relieve or even cure the disease of older age that has befallen him or his persona. However, in true elegiac fashion, if I may call it like that, the masculine in the form of Erasmus's persona and Cop in the Carmen is quickly dominated by the feminine in the form of senecta, right? So it's older age personified. We see this in both Erasmus and Maximianus. And Erasmus describes senecta as the morbus ingens, right? The most terrible of all diseases, and indeed the only one that appears incurable. And this is what Maximianus also says in a very similar manner when he says, tu me sola tibi stupdis miseranda senectus, right? It's miserable old age, which is the only thing that could get me down. So I think these three elements can definitely be explored further, but the elegiac element in a way definitely seems present in Erasmus's Carmen. Now, if we talk about senectus as the worst of all diseases, I think it's worth looking at what constitutes this disease. And I want to take a closer look at the specific ills of older age as described by Erasmus, particularly in couplet 1618. So this couplet, through its rather ascendatic quality, poignantly expresses the contrast between youth and older age by defining older age as everything it is not, so everything it has lost. Now, even though it can be argued that the symptoms we have in these two lines are indeed sort of very commonplace and they are part of common knowledge, they've been appearing in the literary tradition in antiquity throughout, also in medical treatises, for example, by Galen and Hippocrates. So they're quite generic, so to speak. On the other hand, I think it's interesting that we can find the words used by Erasmus in 1618 almost literally in Maximianus's first elegy of the Corpus, scattered throughout. And Maximianus uses quite detailed descriptions of these symptoms. So it's almost as if Erasmus has tried to give a summary of what Maximianus describes at length. And by giving this summary, he actually sort of summarizes the whole literary and medical tradition on the symptoms of older age, because I've mentioned that Maximianus himself, of course, already looks back as well. So I think this summarizing quality is quite interesting, and also to have a look at how Maximianus then gives the description of specific ills. So in 1618, we have formam and colorem. This, of course, refers to the beauty of youth and the beauty of the body of youth that is lost in older age. Maximianus, as you will notice from now on, he's quite depressing in tone and he's quite negative, and he's definitely not one of those examples who look positively on older age. So when it comes to beauty and color, he says, he almost looks dead. He has this funerusque color, like a deathly pallor, he says, so a white. Also, his skin has gone dry. There are nerves standing out everywhere. His hands have become like claws as well. So a very horrible picture that's actually painted of the physical reality of older age as this beauty of the body goes away. Now, then we have the statum is actually related to the body, which is the posture. Erasmus just keeps it at statum, as if the reader should directly know what it is about, and the reader can know this if he, for example, looks at what Maximianus writes about it. And he uses two important verbs in this context, which is contraimur and decrescimus. So contraimur being like sort of we shrink in on our body, and we also shorten in length. And he says it's almost like some bones of our body are disappearing, and it makes us look it gives us a completely different posture than we had in youth. And he describes this as the prona senectus, right? So the hunched over or the bent over old age. So indeed, but older people can have the tendency to walk a bit with a hunch, which is the statum that, in my opinion, Erasmus also references. So these are physical consequences. There are also cognitive or mental consequences. Erasmus just keeps in memoriam. In Maximianus, we read this couplet in which he says, in translation, look how the forgetfulness of the leaf steals upon my mind, and my mind is so confused that it can no longer remember itself. And indeed, we have here the contrast between the mens, whose main function is memenisse, or remember, and there also this element of memory comes into play, also not memory as related to the human body, but also memory in maybe the larger poetical project of his corpus. And he uses this image of the river Leith, which runs in the underworld, and it induces complete forgetfulness in everyone who drinks from its waters. So this is indeed a reference to diminished cognitive capacity, memory loss, perhaps even dementia. And this was, of course, also a well-known consequence already in antiquity. Erasmus goes on and he just says lumina. Again, we find more details in Maximianus, who embeds the function of eyesight within a couplet on the diminished function of all the senses in older age. So we have auditus, which is hearing, the gustus, the taste, tactu, touch, and in between he says ipsa caligant lumina, with caligare meaning clouds are forming before the eyes, or a sort of mist, which can refer to anything from glaucoma to cataract, or perhaps even the onset of blindness. And I think especially the use of lumina by Erasmus instead of oculi creates sort of an interesting link again between 1618 and then what is described here by Maximianus. Then the somnos, which we can be very short about, is difficulty sleeping that older people might experience. Maximianus, again, quite a lengthy passage on the fact that he says somnus avolat, so in older age, sleep seems to fly away. And if it comes back at all, it's very late at night. So he has also trouble sleeping, or his persona has at least. I think in a beautiful line where he says the softness of his pillows sort of have turned into hard rocks, which I think is a rather nice image to describe the fact that he has so much trouble sleeping. And then lastly, in Erasmus, the vires et alacritatem is just general, I think, bodily strength and vividness and energy that just seeps away in older age. And what Maximianus said about that is in older age, people just live by lying down, and vivamque jacendo. And the more he lies down and the less he's able to move his body, the more he seems to resemble a corpse, he says, misero quid funere defert. And it's particularly interesting that in all the descriptions that I've shown you now, or in most of them from Maximianus, the relationship between older age and death is made very explicit. So it's either through the fact that he says he looks like a corpse, so his bodily physique is making him look like a dead man. Also, all references to the underworld through the river Leith, but also he references Tartarus quite a lot. Also, again in this phrase, this misero quid funere defert. So there's a very real presence and relationship between older age and death. And this is something that, in my opinion, also very much concerns Erasmus, especially when we read the question, utrum haec senecta quaeso, an mors lenta magis dicenda est. Should we call it older age, he asks the reader, or should we call it a slow death? And for both authors, the considerations of the ills of older age, as we've just discussed them, also lead to an exploration of possible relief, which I want to look at in closer detail in this last part of the presentation. So, as I've said, the truly depressive and quite compulsive negative tone of Maximianus's poem would suggest that indeed there seems to be no relief at all. He calls older age a prison from which there is no escape, and you just have to wait it out, basically, just wait for death. Now, this does not mean that he hasn't tried curing it, Maximianus's persona. So on the right-hand side on the slide, you can see here that he says all the medication, the medicamina, so the cures and the reliefs that he used in youth and that worked quite well for him in youth do not work any longer in older age. So there's no way that medicine can cure older age, which is something that Erasmus already quite early in the poem realizes too. So when he addresses this cop, he might be the master of all diseases, but there is no medicine that he possesses that might offer relief of older age. So as medicine is quite useless, there is another option explored by both authors, and this is in the form of religion and what you might call higher forces of nature, or sort of a spiritual belief in the higher forces of nature. Now, to have religion or religious aspect in Maximianus's text is surprising and unsurprising, of course, at the same time. It's surprising because elegy, of course, is a genre which normally does not deal with older age. It's a genre that's about love and about youth. So there's no really reason. And of course, it was popular in the 1st century BC, in which Christian religion, of course, was not a thing. So there was no really need to incorporate these kinds of elements. Now, of course, as Maximianus has turned the genre around and has written about older age instead of youth, and precisely because of this relationship between older age and death, it is less of a surprise that this element comes into play, and especially, of course, because he writes in late antiquity, in a time in which Christianity has pervaded every single aspect of human life. That Erasmus talks about Christ is, of course, no surprise at all. But what do these two authors then say about it? So, as Francesco also mentioned, in the poem, Erasmus says that in the remaining years of his life, he will dedicate himself to Christ for all his further intellectual undertakings. And to do this, to take Christ as his muse, he has to reject what I would maybe label, in between brackets, pagan forms of knowledge. Erasmus himself calls these forms voluptai, so it's pleasure. And I would like to make a little detour in this because it's quite interesting that amongst these pagan forms of knowledge, elegy itself is also there. So we have in verse 93 and in 227 the repeated use of the adjective blandus, of course, like dulcis, meaning sweet, and soft, which is the adjective to describe elegy. He also uses the word mellifluous, which is sweet sounding, again, very much linked to the sweet honey in which elegy sometimes is drenched when it's about love and all related emotions. And also the figmenta poesis, which he mentions, might be a reference to sort of the elegiac fiction, which is one of the most important elements of the genre. Now, why do I say this? I think it's quite interesting if you consider the reasons for why Erasmus would have to give up this particular form of writing. So there are two main reasons, I would argue. First of all, elegy, as we say, is a pagan genre, a genre in which Christianity does not play a role at all. Furthermore, it propagates a form of love which Christianity absolutely does not propagate at all. So elegy is about love out of wedlock. It shuns marriage. It's about free love, free affairs with different women. So everything Christianity would not condone when it comes to love and sex. On the other hand, elegy is a genre of youth. So it's about young, virile men who are in love with young, beautiful girls. And Erasmus might think, now that he's getting older, in his opinion, it is no longer appropriate for older men to be writing about these kinds of subjects, right? It's not proper, and it's not what an old man should be doing. He should be pursuing higher forms of intellectual knowledge. Now, this in turn is quite interesting if we consider the overall project that Maximianus attempts with his corpus, in my opinion, which is actually to show how older age and elegy fit together better than one would think. So throughout all 6 poems, Maximianus draws continuous similarities between youth and older age. As youth is plagued by the disease of love, so older age is plagued by, well, yeah, the disease of older age. And he uses quite similar vocabulary to describe the two. And I think in this process actually tries to show how older age and elegy might fit together after all. So this was kind of a detour, but just to say that it's kind of interesting that elegy is amongst these pagan forms of knowledge that Erasmus will reject. Now, the reason, of course, we find in verses 235, 42. So the afterlife promised by Christianity will grant the soul what he calls an immortal and eternal spring. So it will restore the body to its prime after having suffered different physical and mental deteriorations of older age. So the earthly body, as it describes it, the terrea corporis, can fade away. It's absolutely no problem, because this condition will be restored in heaven or in paradise. Now, to a certain extent, we could reason that Erasmus does not, or his persona, as he is presented here, does not fear death, right? He would welcome it, as death for him would mean a reprieve, actually, from old age in the form of an ideal afterlife. What we have in Maximianus is also a very interesting couple of lines which take the form of a religious prayer. So he does not turn to Christ, of course, but he turns to the Genetrix, which is actually Mother Nature or Mother Earth. The Genetrix here sort of stands as the counterpart to Erasmus's Christ, who is called the Vitae Restitutor, so the one who will restore life after death, while the Genetrix, Mother Earth, is the one who gives life. And he pleads to her to take up his tired limbs, his membra fessa, and to take them up into her womb. So, which is, I think, just a nice way to indeed pray for death. He says, "Rede precor patrio mortua membra solo." So please return, I beg you, return my limbs to the earth from which they came. Now,
Nina, sorry to interrupt. We are
yes,
abundantly over the time, so please,
I'm so sorry.
if you can conclude, because yeah.
Yes, yes,
Okay.
just 2 more lines. I just wanted to say that the function of Mother Earth in Maximianus and that of Christ can be equated, as they constitute for both authors a form of salvation and perhaps even a cure for older age. Death for the persona of Maximianus is a cure, because he will finally be able to rest, so eternal rest, as the Christian afterlife for Erasmus also, and death in general, will also cure his older age by bringing about the start of a new youthful eternal life. That was it. Thank you for your attention. I'm sorry that it took so long.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Nina. That was really rich and so interesting. And Francesco, what normally happens is that I give the word just if you have a very short observation, or you would like to react to what Nina said, but really be brief. And also, I would ask the other participants, if they have questions, please let me know. You can either raise your hands or launch a sign so that I know who is going to ask questions. Francesco, I don't know if you want to say, I don't feel...
Extremely quickly, just 2 aspects that haven't come out from either presentations. So one of the major topics of the ending of Erasmus poem actually comes from Prudentius. It's almost sort of a line by line sort of reappraisal of what Prudentius says in his prefatio, when he says, when he considers his life, says, "I'm 75. what have I done with my life? It's now time to use my life well. I wasted all of my previous life. Now I have the time. I need to wake up and take my time back, which is precisely, I think, Nina will correct me if I'm wrong, Erasmus' point towards the end of the poem. And secondly, also another topic that comes out towards the end, the necessity, that was actually shared by other humanists. It becomes an important topic in Giulio Camillo after Erasmus, the topic of the eyes, sort of the bodily eyes, or rather the eyes of the body, which are what a man is looking with when they are young, and which are substituted by the eyes of the mind when they become older, that is wisdom. Actually, it almost becomes a mystical topic, but I leave it at that.
Okay, thank you. Wonderful. Do you have any other questions or observation? Don't be shy. We are a small group. You can just jump in the discussion without raising your hands. Okay.
So, Marco, if you don't mind, just a very, very brief
of course, go ahead.
Observation. Yeah. Mainly a big thank you to both of you, because I'm studying old age and youth in classical literature for some time now, but I always lacked the knowledge of late antique traditions. So this adds a very an important piece to my perspective. Just one brief remark. The Erasmus Carmen is really interesting for me, because it seems to intertwine the two main attitudes toward old age in classical times, which is on one hand the hate for the old age and the fear of old age, which is mainly Greek in spirit, in the lyric tradition of archaic Greece, and on the other hand, the more Roman attitude, so to speak. I'm very simplifying, which tries to find something useful about old age, and for example, the role of guidance that elders have in society. So I think that these two perspectives are quite nicely intertwined, as long as we recognize that for Erasmus, and I think for Christians in general, the main point in old age is the contemplation of Christ, and not so much the role in the society that they don't recognize as very important. So this is both a synthesis of these two perspectives, and maybe an act of I mean, I think Christians and Erasmus adds something more to these two perspective through the Christian discourse, of course, through the contemplation and Christianity. So thank you very much for your readings.
Thank you, Luca. I don't know if you guys want to say something about what Luca just said, Nina or Francesco, since we don't have any other.
Yeah, thank you very much for that comment. I think it's indeed really interesting to think about the poem as sort of uniting what's been said in the classical tradition, and indeed adding this layer of contemplation. And what Francesco also said in his presentation, I think the whole notion of memory versus contemplation, or the link between the two, or what the difference is between these two processes when it comes to older age and its relationship to youth, is very interesting to explore, I think, in a wide range of texts. I think it's very present here in Erasmus. Maximianus as well. I just showed one instance of this Memenice being present, but it's throughout the whole thing because it's been constructed as this flashback. And it's as if Erasmus is trying to remember something that hasn't happened yet to him, sort of in the present. And indeed, with the Christian notion of contemplation and looking for the brighter side, let's say, of older age, I think it's very interesting to look at it from that perspective and see the many things he actually unites in this poem, which is quite long, but on the other hand, quite synthetical in its quality. So yeah, thank you for the comment. I think it's interesting to think about.
Okay, thank you, Nina. I don't know if anybody else would like to say something. Otherwise, we are perfectly on time, 60 minutes from now. But please go ahead. I don't want to stop you. I mean, we can be here another couple of minutes if you have another question. Or observation. It doesn't look to be the case. Okay, so thank you so much. That was really interesting. The texts you discussed, both Petrarch and, of course, Maximianus. Francesco, Francesco Lubian, since
No, I just...
Okay, sorry. Okay. So I really thank you both. It was a great pleasure, and I'll see you, those of you who are interested in an audience, next week. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Everyone.
Thank you so much. Bye. Bye.
Bye. See you. Ok, Francesco, grazie mille. Io devo andare perché ho questi 6 ospiti a
cena. La cena, ci riaggiorniamo.
Sì, a presto.
Andava bene così?
Ottimo, grazie, davvero fantastico. Ciao.
Ciao.